Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And I think this presentation flows very well after the previous one, in which we saw practical uses of technology into the classroom. My perspective here, as you can see in the title of my presentation, Perceptions, Practices, and Attitudes on the use of the iPads in the English as a foreign language classroom, evidence from the Andorran School System. In this study, we examine how digital transformation in education, specifically the introduction of the iPads in the Andorran school system, shapes the way both students and teachers engage with English as a foreign language. The Andorran context is unique because it's one of the few national education systems where every teacher and student has access to an iPad. For the next 20 minutes, approximately, I'll take you through the background of this initiative, the research design, some key findings, and what they tell us about digital learning today. I'll conclude with some practical implications for teachers, policymakers, and researchers. So please feel free to note any Q&A you might have for the end. This presentation is structured to cover three main goals. The first one, to present the key findings of the study, how iPads are actually used in EFL classrooms, and what both the students and teachers think about this technology. Second, I'd like to share the Andorran's experience as a small multilingual nation that adopted a large-scale digital education reform. For those of you who are not aware about the reality of Andorra, and then I could compare it here, Italy close by, we have San Marino, which is a fully sovereign country. So Andorra will be pretty much the same thing, but in between France and Spain, in the Pyrenees mountain range, a very small country, fully sovereign state. This national case allows us to explore questions that many larger systems also face, such as how to ensure equity, engagement, and sustainability in digital learning. And third, the third pillar of this study pretends to highlight the benefits, the risks, and the implications. We often talk about technology as a universal solution, but this study shows a more complex reality, one that includes enthusiasm, innovation, and also challenges like distraction in the classroom and teacher preparedness. These objectives aim to link empirical evidence with real-world educational practice. To understand this study, we need to look at Andorra's educational landscape. 12 years ago, the government launched the PERMSEA strategic plan for the renewal and improvement of the Andorran education system. One of its major reforms and implications was the digitalization of teaching and learning, including universal distribution of iPads to teachers and students. The aim was only not to modernize instruction, but to align it with competence-based education, focusing on real-life application, creativity, and critical thinking. What makes this context even more fascinating is its multilingual character. Catalan is the only official language of the country, but pretty much everyone can speak Spanish and French, and there's a large percentage of Portuguese immigration. So Portuguese is also part of the students' linguistic environments. In such a setting, English as a foreign language becomes an additional bridge language, and technology becomes both a tool and a mediator for communication. This context provides a rich testing ground for observing how digital learning interacts with language learning and identity. Building on this background, my study was guided by three main questions. The first one was regarding perceptions. How do teachers and students perceive the use of the iPads in the English language learning? The second was regarding practices. What kinds of classroom practices and learning routines have emerged from this integration of technology into the EFL classroom? And the third one was regarding attitudes. what attitudes, whether it was enthusiasm, resistance, or ambivalence, accompany this digital transformation. These questions move beyond simply asking whether the iPads work or not in the classroom. They also explore the human and pedagogical dimensions, how people feel, adapt, and redefine their roles when a new technology enters the classroom. This research is framed with the evolution of language learning technologies from CAL, computer-assisted language learning, to MAL, mobile-assisted language learning. You all know that CAL emerged back in the 1960s and evolved from drill-based practice to communicative and integrative approaches. Mobile-assisted language learning, on the other hand, emphasizes mobility, autonomy, and context flexibility. Learning anytime, anywhere. This is the crucial concept here. Scholars like Kukulska, Hullman, and Shinery highlight that mobile-assisted language learning transforms not only where learning happens, but also how learners relate to knowledge. However, there is a key message in the literature. Technology by itself doesn't improve learning. What matters is the pedagogical design behind this technology, how teachers integrate these tools into meaningful tasks, as we saw in the previous presentation. This idea is central to the Andorran case, where technology was given to everyone, but the pedagogical adaptation varied widely. Findings show several positive aspects of using iPads in English as a foreign language class. Engagement and motivation increased substantially. Students found learning English more enjoyable, more dynamic when it involved multimedia, games, interactive apps, like the ones we saw before. Autonomy and flexibility were also enhanced in the language classroom. Learners could work at their own pace, revisit materials, and explore topics beyond the classroom. Inclusivity improved, particularly for students who struggle with traditional methods. Visual learners and those with learning differences benefited from multimodal content. From a teacher's perspective, iPads facilitated differentiated instruction and access to authentic, real materials. Overall, the devices, the technology, open new pedagogical possibilities. Though, as we'll see, they also required teachers to rethink classroom management and assessment. Alongside the benefits, the research define important challenges as well. Distraction was one of the most commonly cited problems. Students often shifted attention to entertainment or social media, making it harder for teachers to maintain focus in the classroom, in the lesson. Also, teacher training emerged as another critical issue. Many teachers felt underprepared to integrate digital tools meaningfully. Some lacked confidence, while others simply hadn't received ongoing professional development. Another risk was over-reliance. Some students became too dependent on the iPad, using it as a shortcut instead of developing core skills such as note-taking, memory, or handwriting. These drawbacks don't undermine the project, but they do remind us that digital transformation must go hand in hand with pedagogical support. The study followed a qualitative dominant mixed methods design with an interpretive constructivist paradigm. The goal of the study was to capture lived experiences and contextual meanings rather than to measure cause-effect relationships. Data collection combined ethnographic methods, such as classroom observations and interviews, also together with quantitative surveys to identify general trends. This design allowed triangulation, comparing data from multiple sources, which increased the study's validity and depth. The ethnographic lens also helped reveal subtle differences in how teachers and students understand the same technology. In short, it was about looking beyond numbers to see the human side of digital education. The participants were 25 EFL teachers and more than 300 secondary students aged between 13 and 16. What makes this unique is that we were able to study the whole universe and not rather a sample just because of the size of Andorra. We were examining this amount of students and this amount of teachers, and we were able to analyze the whole universe and not a sample, which makes it very different from other studies to be done elsewhere. Data came from three main tools: questionnaires, as I mentioned, to quantify perceptions, semi-structured interviews to explore the attitudes, and classroom observations to capture real-time practices. The schools selected, also the three schools where these students were placed, so that's all the schools in Andorra with that age range, in Encamp, Ordina, and Andorra la Vella, represented the geographical and cultural diversity of the whole of the Andorran system. Students were generally enthusiastic about participating in the study, often sharing spontaneous comments during the observation sessions, and teachers were equally reflective, though more cautious in tone, especially about the workload and the pedagogical implications that incorporating technology in the classroom entailed. This combination of voices gave the study both breadth and also authenticity. Data were analyzed using a conversion parallel mixed methods approach, as I mentioned before. This means that qualitative and quantitative strands were processed independently and later merged for comparison. Themes emerged around perceptions, practices, and attitudes, which became the organizing framework for the findings. For example, high engagement levels in surveys were cross-validated with classroom observations showing active student participation. This triangulation confirmed that what participants said matched what they actually did in the classroom, lending a strong credibility to the conclusions. The result was a nuanced understanding that goes beyond enthusiasm or skepticism to capture the lived reality of iPad integration in the classroom. In terms of perception, the results were strikingly positive. 93% of the students reported daily iPad use in their English classes, and most of them described it as motivating and engaging. They appreciated access to videos, to interactive exercises, and online dictionaries that made English feel alive and relevant. Teachers also valued the flexibility, especially for multimedia teaching and personalized learning. But many teachers highlighted the lack of institutional training. About 75% of the teachers, said they had to learn by trial and error. Interestingly, main domains. In class, students worked on vocabulary games, reading comprehension, and multimedia projects. Teachers used iPads for presentations, for quizzes, and also for classroom management. Out of the classroom, iPads were also used, and iPads extended learning beyond the school. Students watched English videos, used apps like Duolingo, or recorded oral exercises. Teachers also use their iPads for lesson planning and communication, often through digital platforms. However, despite these new tools, many practices still replicated traditional models in the classroom. For instance, filling digital worksheets instead of paper ones. This shows that innovation requires not only devices, but also pedagogical transformation. The students' attitudes were largely enthusiastic. They describe iPads as creative, inclusive, and liberating, especially when working collaboratively or expressing themselves through media. Teachers were more measured, generally positive, but aware of the challenges. They appreciated motivation gains, but the struggle with classroom control and the constant updates or distractions technology brings into the classroom. A number of teachers also mentioned increased workload. Planning digital lessons takes more time. So while attitudes are favorable overall, they reflect a balance between optimism and caution, a realistic stance when innovation meets everyday teaching practice. The discussion links these findings to broader educational debates. First, universal provision of iPads prevented inequity. No student was left out due to lack of resources. This contrasts with other countries where unequal access created a digital divide. Second, the multilingual context shaped perceptions. Teachers and students saw iPads as bridges between languages, using them to translate, communicate, and create multilingual content. And third, this study reinforces that technology alone does not transform learning. Pedagogy remains the key driver. Without appropriate guidance and reflection, digital tools risk reproducing old practices rather than transforming them. These findings have several implications. For pedagogy, teachers should design tasks that foster authenticity, communication, and creativity rather than substitutional use of digital tools. For policy, governments should ensure that curriculum goals and digital practices are aligned and not parallel tracks. Continuous teacher professional development is crucial. Technology evolves faster than curricula, so training must be ongoing and practical. Finally, evaluation mechanisms are needed to assess how technology impacts learning outcomes and student well-being. Three key recommendations arise. Continuous training. Teachers need to sustain hands-on digital pedagogy workshops. Hybrid teaching. Combine digital and face-to-face activities to balance screen exposure. And monitoring systems. The schools should regularly evaluate how devices are used, not just technically, but pedagogically. Additionally, collaboration among teachers can spread innovation and reduce isolation. Peer learning communities are powerful in supporting change. These steps can ensure that technology serves pedagogy and not the other way around. To conclude, the Andorran case shows that iPads can effectively enhance language learning when supported by proper training and reflection. Teachers and students perceive the devices positively, but enthusiasm must be matched with structure and support. The key message is innovation succeeds when it's pedagogically coherent. Technology is a tool and not a goal. Its effectiveness depends on how it is integrated into meaningful learning experiences. Every study, of course, has its limits. This research focuses on qualitative depth in a specific national context, so the findings shouldn't be generalized blindly. Future work could examine longitudinal effects. Do these positive perceptions persist over time? Do they translate into measurable language gains? And so on. Another direction would be cross-subject studies to see how tablets influence teaching in other subjects like science, math, or social studies. Finally, comparative research across small multilingual states like Andorra could help identify broader digital regional patterns. To sum up, the main takeaways: iPads boost motivation and inclusion, making English more accessible and engaging. Teacher readiness determines success. Devices are only as effective as the pedagogy behind them. And balanced, reflective use of technology leads to sustainable improvement. The Andorran experience contributes valuable insights for countries exploring large-scale digital reforms. Thank you very much.